to bring your practice into every single aspect of your life.
When we come to our practices with a sense of sincerity, coming into your practice with a sense of self-empowerment, I think is also very important.
It's not about how many books you have out or how many followers you have. We all have the same value. We're all part of the same stuff.
You're not just healing that present situation, you're working through it in your past and your future. Your medicine could be someone else's poison, and their poison can be your medicine.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with me, Christian, aka the Atlantean Alchemist, and
Viv, aka Lunar Faery Witch. Welcome, everyone.
alrighty, guys. So we're gonna be talking about magical defense and unraveling family dynamics. So we're gonna be talking about all things from being in the closet with your practice, as well as dealing with toxic family members and kind of unraveling any of those dynamics or belief systems that are created from those exchanges that can affect our practice. So going straight into it, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own practice with like being in the closet. So it really depends on the cultures and the symbols that are associated with what people consider evil. You have to keep an eye out for what your family considers to be evil. So for example, I have a lot of sigils that I work with. None of those look evil to my family, but when you look to the pentagram, there's so many connotations with that people can perceive it in a ill light, even though they don't understand the real meaning behind it. So the really important thing is to look at the signs and symbols that they have mentioned, maybe have associated in passing, that are red flags for you. And sometimes you may even be partially in the closet. What I've done personally while working in the closet before I've been more open with my family about my practices have been meditating. Meditating has been a really big part of my practice, doing guided meditations. Usually anything involving having your earphones in helps a lot rather than to have it out loud. I haven't had a problem with crystals, so that's been a very big part of my practice as well. You could always start out with jewelry instead of having just the solid rocks, because I know some people have problems with crystals. Usually appearing as jewelry is something that's usually really, really okay, and people will usually fawn over it. Other things that have worked for me, my family's been okay with tarot cards and things like that, because I have a lot of psychics in my family, not a lot of them embracing their abilities and gifts and stuff like that later on, more focusing on Catholicism and Christianity. But some other means of divination, you can do the body pendulum. So the body pendulum method is essentially you will stand still with your arms relaxed, and you're going to ask a yes or no question, and a question you have the answer to. And as if the answer is yes, you're going to end up leaning forward. If the answer is no, you're going to end up leaning backwards. And then you're going to just keep doing this until you kind of figure out how your own body works to answering your own question. And then doing this with questions you don't know the answer to. That works really well if you do that without tools. Another thing is energy work. One book I highly recommend is Holistic Energy Magic by Tess Weinhert. Even though she does take more of a love and light approach, I would say, to it, the importance of the aspects of the energy work and those techniques is that she gives you the basis for setting very strong, detailed intentions, and then combining your will with those intentions and your visualization efforts. Using energy work and even working with sigils through imagination and illumination from the mind works wonders to draw them out with your fingers or anything like that. There's a lot of ways to work. Usually people I notice who do magic in the closet usually work a lot with the astral. So astral projection, lucid dreaming. Those are big things I notice with people that are in the closet, because it's all this work that you can do and there's no physical evidence to deter you from committing to your practice. What about you, Viv?
So I second the astral work thing and energy work. One book I'd also recommend that's really been making rounds for good reason is Psychic Witch by Matt Oren, because almost all of the exercises in that book don't require tools, and they're very based on visualization, energy work, meditation, etc. And also, if you want to practice in the broom closet from a demonolator's perspective, I definitely recommend checking out a PDF written by S. Connolly on demonolatry.org called Hidden: Living with the Uninitiated. And there she really goes over astral work, creating an astral temple, being able to hide your demonolatry practice in particular from family members or roommates who maybe aren't so accepting, especially since we all know the left-hand path is very, very stigmatized. You know, witchcraft is already stigmatized, but the left-hand path is exponentially so. Another thing you can do in terms of divination, there are a few things. A lot of these are even traditional methods that have been done for hundreds of years. So, divination with playing cards instead of tarot cards is a really good one. And, you know, that's also a part of a lot of folk practices. It's a very historically, you know, popular practice among a lot of cultures. And I grew up with that as well. You can read tea leaves and coffee grounds. You can do all of those. You can scry. You can do a lot of stuff with this, like with divination, without even ever having to buy a spirit board or a tarot deck or anything that's like super conspicuous while you're living with whoever it is who's not as accepting as we would like them to be. And the other thing is, like, when it comes to books, especially with minors, since I know a lot of minors don't have their own money and you may not be able to buy ebooks, if you are going to read free books online, please make sure they're not pirated. But you can definitely go on, I believe, the Hermetic Library online, and those are all free. They have a lot of Crowley's work. If you're into LaVeyan Satanism, there are free audiobooks of the Satanic Bible on YouTube. All that public domain stuff, definitely check it out. Modern Demonolatry by S. Connolly is a free PDF online, and it has so much information about getting started on demonolatry, and it's really, really good. So if you, for some reason, don't have your own money, like for example, like I said, if you're a minor, there's definitely public domain and just generally free and legal PDFs and audiobooks you can find online. Just be sure that you're not pirating, which is a whole other topic, but pirating does definitely harm authors within our community, so we want to reduce that as much as humanly possible. And of course, you can listen to podcasts like the one we have here. There's some really great YouTube channels. I mean, in my link tree, I have a Google Doc with resources, and that includes a whole bunch of really good YouTube channels. And that's just on the learning perspective from, you know, if you have a family that'll maybe look through your books, if you have physical books, you can also keep your book of shadows on your computer or on your phone. However, you can keep it online rather than if they don't look through your phone and your computer, of course. If they do that, then that's a whole other story. You're probably going to have to erase all your YouTube history and everything like that. But if they only look through like your room and stuff, you can definitely move your stuff on to a digital format. But having said all of that, my main concern is like your safety. Your safety is most important. So if your family, if you know they look through your phone and if they find witchy stuff on there, that they'll kick you out or they'll, you know, be bad to you in any way, I think that your safety is more important than that. And but also I think that that whoever you are, if you're listening and this resonates with you, I trust your judgment that you'll know what to do and how to deal with your own family. But please keep in mind that while practicing in the broom closet is great and a lot of us have done it, also be careful of your own safety and don't do anything reckless.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Viv. You gave a lot of disclaimers there. I'm actually really interested in that PDF you mentioned from S. Connolly myself, because I've heard a lot about working with astral temples. One technique that was given to me from a mentor of mine, if you have any piece of quartz, particularly in jewelry, just because we're talking about how crystal jewelry is more acceptable than the physical stones, the quartz crystals, you can actually work with them and program them to hold your astral temple. So you can actually tap into the quartz and create and visualize the schematics of how you want to create your like inner sanctuary. And you could tap into that space whenever you want through the quartz when you're meditating. And that's been a really good practice for me, because sometimes you just need to create that very conducive and healthy space, even if it's just within as well, for you to unravel yourself in all those and really delve into your practice. And usually that's a really good space to meet spirit guides and really set the scene if you're doing any kind of guided meditations to meet them or anything like that. That's helped me tremendously as well. One thing I did want to cover, Viv brought up some interesting ideas that reminded me of a few tidbits. So one, if you have any witchcraft books, you can actually, they sell just the outside binders that you could put on top of your witchcraft books to make them look like other books. Particularly, you could do it with like fiction books or like the Holy Bible. Do that. And they'll leave it alone because they know what to expect looking just out in the front of the book. Another thing, people have to be careful, because I've seen this before. When you're ordering witchy stuff online, make sure that you always leave a note to the person who is giving you the products or whatever, to leave out anything that would be related to like witchy stuff. So a lot of people like to decorate their products with pentagrams and things like that, or anything that could be tied back to witchcraft. And there's parents that go out there and look through people's mail. So please keep that in mind. Or even just like, sometimes people have like witchy names to their business when they're shipping the product, and then the parent can get suspicious of who is the sender. So please keep that in mind. That's another really big thing I've seen with other people. I've had to be precautious of like people sending me stuff with a bunch of pentagrams. Myself in the past, my mom is far more educated now in her own understanding of magic. As I've gotten to be more open about my practice with my family, they're learning. So always, if you kind of catch them in those moments where they're kind of questioning what they've understood, be that little voice, guide them very passively to a direction that might give them a little bit more leeway, because it will give them space to you understand you later. It's not always going to be the case for every family. Some are going to be very set to their traditions and their ways, but sometimes people can open up and want to relearn. So like, for example, because of the show Lucifer on Netflix, that's opened up my mother to understand the differences between Satan and Lucifer, and how they're not the same entity, or at least in the way that she understands what Satan means to her because of the religious dogma that she grew up with. So that's something to kind of understand as well if you're still in the closet. But I did want to start going into talking about family dynamics, especially with toxic family members. This could be with like narcissists or anything like that. I wanted to talk about like magical defense and going into, passive and active magic, ways and that you could protect yourself, create sacred space, and take care of yourself. If you're stuck with family members you can't necessarily like get rid of or like banish out of your life because of financial reasons or what have you, you need to know the resources that would be best for you to work your magic in those situations. Do you want to start us off with that bit?
Yeah, so my number one tip with this, with using magic in difficult situations with your family, is you have to, even more than other kinds of baneful magic, if you live with these people, you have to consider every single outcome that could happen. And I would always recommend doing divination before doing anything. Because let's say you curse or hex a family member that you're financially dependent on, and they lose their job and end up homeless. Well, guess what? You're also going to be homeless, and you're going to be in an even worse situation because of it. So when it comes to that, be very, 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 very careful about what you're doing. Be very specific about what you want and why you're doing it. So, for example, one thing that I think could be a safer form of magic for kind of helping to alleviate the situation. I'll actually probably name a few, but one thing you could do is a sort of domination magic where you are more in control of them, right? Because if someone is obsessively controlling, you're going to want to gain as much control over them and the situation as possible. A couple things I like to do for domination magic, you can place like their tag lock in your shoe so you're constantly stepping on them. That's a really popular way. You can use calamus root or calamus oil, which is very well known for its sort of controlling properties where you have full control and stuff like that. Another thing you can do is a binding, but again, be very specific with what you're binding them from and what you want with that. And then beyond just the more baneful stuff, you can always do kind of protections. So let's say if you have your own room, you can do a protection just for your room, and so that is your energetic space and they can't intrude into that. And while that method is not 100% foolproof, it is quite helpful because it does help establish this space as yours as a safe space away from all the bullshit. Some other things I personally have done is mainly the protection stuff, carrying protective stones around me that'll just protect my emotional energy. So even if there's like an argument going on in the home or there's something going on, I'm at least doing the best that I can to protect and shield my energy. And carrying a stone like that along with like a shielding visualization is quite helpful, especially with shields. If you do a shield meditation visualization, they don't really tend to stay on all day in my experience, but they are very helpful for like shorter amounts of time. So let's say you spend a lot of time in your room and then you go outside to where your family is to eat dinner with them or something because they insist you eat dinner with them. You can have that shield up for that duration and it'll be just fine for that amount of time. So that's another thing you can do. I would just recommend, again, my number one tip is be very cautious, very tactful, and don't be too aggressive with whatever baneful magic you might do to protect yourself or do against your family, because like I said earlier, you don't want to put yourself in a bad situation along with someone that you're currently dependent on. But those are definitely my number one tips in terms of magic to protect yourself and to perhaps bind people from doing you harm.
Yeah, I really like that. I did want to build on your topic about aura shielding and energy shielding in general. Usually when you're doing aura shielding, it lasts maybe a couple hours, especially if it's in where you're surrounded by energies that are very discordant to your own. Especially you have to be aware of your emotional state because your emotional state affects the sustainability of that aura shield as well. So if you let yourself get swept away with your emotions, it breaks down the aura shield a lot faster. So you have to be centered when you're doing your auric shielding and like when you're approaching those conflicting situations. So another tip for auric shielding that I've come up with is, particularly if you work with any kind of spirit, you can actually ask that spirit and intend with them to assist you in building that auric shield, and intend that it is an auric shield that is able to regenerate itself over time. So this helps to keep it lasting throughout the day. It will have like holes in it, but it will like, close up. So it will be like Swiss cheese and will be like slowly restored over time. I noticed this technique maybe works for a couple days, but it doesn't last more than that because it has to be constantly fed. But it's something that can help if you need it to last a little longer for you. I recommend multiple layers instead of just one. And then like intend like different little techniques into each layer. So like your outer layer can be more like transmutative. As you get closer as the layers get closer to your own aura and energy, they could be more harder, more like crystalline and like visual structure so that it can take a punch. So kind of more fluid on the outside and more like transfigurative and like flowish. And as it gets closer to you, something harder and stronger. That has worked wonders for me. And this even works for people in retail, everything. So that's one tip that I have on that matter. When it comes to creating sacred space, the most important thing is finding a space that you feel most comfortable in your home. Usually that's going to be your own room. So that's the place that you should have cleaned and organized regularly, because that's going to affect your emotional state, the state of your room, because it's your sanctuary. What you surround yourself with is going to empower and nurture you. Let that be your space away from the war zone. Okay? So I tend to be very intentional with the things that I surround myself with. And even if, like, for example, you can't have all these crystals out or anything like that, or like in my house, you can't have incense burning when people are home. They're too sensitive to the smells. So you have to do a lot of energy work. I recommend the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, for people to do as energy work. I recommend doing that daily. And if you deal with a lot of argumentative energy in your space throughout every day, I recommend doing it in the morning and the night. The problem with it that I've noticed, I don't know if happens to other people as well, that I notice my wards start to wane when I do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, because it's like spiritual bleach. So my recommendation is as well to renew those protections. And in those cases of conflicting energies, you're going to want to do it daily anyways. For most people, we're good to do it for like a month. But if you notice this is a trend, you want to set it up in a way that it can maintain itself. You could even create a servitor to maintain those wards for you. So even if you break them down, they'll build it back up for you. That's one technique that I recommend. Another thing that has helped me tremendously change the relationship between me and my family members is and I tend to do this in the shower, because this is the time that I'm away from everyone. Everyone leaves you alone when you're in the bathroom for the most part. So what you do is you're going to call all of your energy back to you. Think of every person that you were involved with throughout your day, every interaction, and you're going to kind of sweep your hand towards you, and you're going to say, I call back all of my energy from across all space and time to be reintegrated into my being. And you're just going to keep thinking of every single person you've interacted with, and you're going to feel it, kind of this energy of you, and it's your energy. It's basically, it comes from you thinking all these thoughts and projecting your energy towards these people from your day, whether positive or negative or what have you. It's just calling it all back to you. So it's centralized in you. This actually keeps you from maintaining those constant cycles of conflict. And then you're going to send back all energy that isn't your own and return it back to everyone. So you're going to sweep your hand away from you and thinking of all those interactions, everyone that you've talked to. The first few times that you do this you're going to feel a lot more energy exchange than later on, because you're going to be sweeping from like the beginning of time. So when you do that afterwards, I then either enchant the waters that you bathe in for purification, because you want to cleanse the energy that maybe you sent out. Maybe you gave someone some evil eye because they were, being nasty to you or whatever. You want to clear that out afterwards. But when you do that daily, I promise you that it changes your interactions so much. Like, you fight a lot less. They leave you alone. But if you don't do it daily, it will build up over time, and you'll notice it, like, the fighting happens a lot more than it usually does. Another thing is to cut cords with people. And what I mean by this is you're not cutting the cords with the person themselves, because you're not trying to banish them and ruin your home situation where, they're no longer your financial support. Unless you're in the position to do that, great. The recommendation is to actually cut the cord of the conflict or the energy of that, because that itself creates a stream of energy. My recommendation for cutting cords is obsidian or sulfur. Those are the best tools to cut it. You can do it with outside help. For those of you who work with angels, Archangel Michael. For those of you who work with demons, King Belial's great at it with the black flame. So that's two very good resources. Hold on, I'm just going off on a tangent here with all these techniques. Let me think. There's another thing off the top of my head that has helped me is doing wards and placing it between the mattress under your bed if you need to interweave like certain energies with you. Particularly, I know people feel most unsettled when they're going to bed. So that's when you want to focus your energy on the most. Like you can put sigils underneath your bed or inside your pillow. I wouldn't put it underneath your pillow because if you're like me and sleep all over the place, it's just going to fall right out all over the place. And you don't need that kind of evidence everywhere. But when it comes to spirit work, so I wanted to give a few examples of how my relationship with my family has changed a lot. I still deal with my own situations. So what has helped me is my work with my matron goddess Freya. Freya has helped me a lot coming from a place of not trying to get too personal, but essentially getting to where I was used to be suicidal and coming out of that space of like self-loathing and like being unable to handle the rules and all these like new changes into my family dynamics by new people being included into my life. She has helped me essentially build up my confidence, help me to release social anxiety, and even give this person in my life a job in a position that got them more money and more time away from home. So she ended up giving them a job that would have them traveling across the United States like every other week so that they would be homeless or working extra hours or overtime. And she still does this. Even with all their job changes, she has helped me in this respect. And that's been a really big help for me because it gives me the emotional space that I need to reflect on how I'm feeling and how to take care of my own energy. It may be different for other people with who their matrons, patrons are, whatever that may be. That has helped me tremendously. And what's interesting about this kind of workings that we're thinking of, this comes into this idea of like we are reaching that similarity where we're seeing that these individuals in our life that may be toxic in whatever shape or form that may be, we're forced to tolerate them. We're forced to be put in a position where we have to find some sort of neutral ground with them so that we can live our life and do what we need to do and eventually get out. So that is the premise that really helps us out too. So like Viv mentioned with the writing their name out on a piece of paper and putting under your shoe and stomping on it as you go throughout your day, like including some sort of oils for domination and subjugation. You could even do binding. I know people do freezer spells. I don't recommend freezer spells for family members because they open the fridge and you don't want them to find a jar with their name in it in the freezer. So I don't recommend something that has physical evidence like that. If you're doing binding spells, I prefer not magic. I noticed that seems to work very well. And it looks like if you don't really do a lot to make it look and stand out, they're just going to be like, this is just a string with knots. I don't know why this person is keeping this. But you can create something like that. And some techniques that have helped me as well, or things that I've been thinking about in my own family dynamics. Not everyone is going to like the idea of baneful magic on family members. For me, it isn't about causing them difficulties. It's more about lessening them causing difficulties to you. If you want to throw in some, like, giving them nightmares or whatever, just for the hell of it, some payback, okay, great. But generally, we're just talking about like making the situations better. So some ideas that have come to me, I did create a spell called the Call of Swords, which I have on my YouTube channel, the Atlantean Alchemist, where I talk about, it's actually a spell based on some Psalms from the Bible that I rearranged and created a curse from. This is like the first curse I've ever made at the start of my practice, but like re-edited. So this curse, what it does is essentially anything that they do, any actions that they take, become internalized instead of externalized. So if they have this issue with projecting onto you, or especially if it's a matter of safety, the curse forces all those things to happen inwards. So it promotes the loathing that they push outwards and try and point at you, which is really their own self-loathing, it points it right back. And that has worked wonders for me for a while. But lately I've noticed that the projection still occurs as a result, because it's just a constant back and forth firing within themselves. What I now know might be a better option is an idea of creating a curse that whenever someone wants to get argumentative, you can actually do this curse, and when they want to have a fight or a conflict with you, they automatically feel so tired and so exhausted they can't fight you anymore. Because there's some parents out there that, like, you counter argue, like maybe it's do as I say but not as I do kind of situations in parents, where they set these unrealistic expectations and rules for you, but they don't follow the rules that they create themselves, which is a very common dynamic that I've seen. It would work best in those where you, let's say you tried to do a counter argument and they want to go on a tangent for like 2 hours trying to explain why their reasoning is solid and founded, and you don't want to continue that argumentative conversation. So if they want to get in your face about it, this curse, what it would do is make them so tired, so exhausted, they can't keep fighting you. And so the moment they just start, they'll get too exhausted, they need to lie down. That's one technique that's come to mind that I find that might be very effective. Binding work is always effective as well, but I notice you have to also analyze and identify what your best abilities are. Not everyone has the same ability to curse and bind. You're going to have certain abilities that are better and more unique to you, certain skill sets based off your character, your nature, maybe even your astrology, as to what types of magic you're better at. So not everyone is best at binding. So like for me, for example, I'm not really good at bindings. I'm really good at banishing, and I'm really good with curses that have to do with deterioration of health. So for me, something like deterioration of vitality, like, wearing them down, works great for me. It's going to be totally different for every individual. So these are just some ideas to give you some inspiration to make your family dynamics a little bit more tolerable. My recommendation is to experiment, but always divine first before experimenting. You're going to see what works over time. This is not something that's going to be done in a day, but it will slowly get better over time as you work these new techniques and make some sort of routine for yourself to create that sacred space. Did you have anything that you wanted to cover on this, Viv?
So for me, one of the thing that worked the most for me was actually working with Belial. He really surprised me with how fast the results were and how intense they were, because I was having a horrible time with my family. Just general strife. It wasn't like, I wouldn't say it was a one-sided thing. It was just general, disalignment of people and their energies, and just being so different that it just doesn't work out. And so I worked with Belial, and I basically just told him what I wanted. And at first I was like, I don't know, maybe it's not going to work. But then like 2 days later, my relationship with my family just completely shifted, and just it was so utterly different, and in a way it had never been before. Like, we were able to actually sit down and have a conversation. I was able to explain how I felt, and they actually thought about it, and that had never happened before. So Belial gave me probably the best results I have ever had with magic relating to any of those kinds of issues. A more mundane thing for me personally, now this isn't going to work for everyone's parents because some parents are too set in their ways, but when at first my mom wasn't sure about the witchcraft thing, because in our culture we do the exact same thing, although minus the demon stuff. But it's not called witchcraft, it's folk magic, right? But the word witchcraft has such bad connotations that she was like, I don't know, it seems bad. But once she watched my YouTube videos, she completely changed her mind on it, because she realized that it wasn't something awful or bad or cruel or mean. It was basically, it was just magic, right? And now she asks me for spiritual advice, and we talk about it, and I, talk to her about the stuff I'm learning, minus the demon stuff, and it's completely fine. But, sometimes, most of the time, again, not all the time, some parents are just flat out cruel, but some of the time, some parents are just, they don't know, right? They grew up with the idea witchcraft bad, witchcraft bad, witchcraft bad, and never actually learned what it actually is. And so sometimes if they once they educate themselves and they're willing to educate themselves and willing to learn, and again, not everyone's willing to do that, but if you have parents who are willing to learn, it could definitely be helpful for them to watch some YouTube videos on it and to just understand what it is. And this will probably work with parents who are either not religious or who are religious but not extremists. If you have parents who are extremist Christian, who don't accept any other viewpoint than their own, any other religion, they think every single religion other than Christianity is satanic, then this probably won't work because I feel like those people are too far gone. For the most part, I've never been able to get through to them because it's just like talking to a wall, right? It's like talking to a brick wall. It doesn't get through to them. But if your parents are a little more open and willing to learn, then that could definitely be something that they do. But again, mind your own safety first. If you think if there's any suspicion that you showing them a video explaining what witchcraft actually is might lead to like a violent outburst or something, obviously please don't do it. Be safe. And those are the main things for me. And, just understand that this isn't permanent. Nothing's permanent, but this is a temporary situation that you're in that you have to get through and make the best of, and you might not always feel so great throughout all this, and that's completely understandable. I know a lot of us who grew up with family problems have had to deal with things that carry into adulthood, and that again, that takes a lot of, for lack of a better word, shadow work or whatever you want to call it, introspection, self-development, meditation, even deity work, where you might work with a motherly or fatherly figure to kind of heal those wounds. Inner child work, for me, the main deity that has helped me with inner child work has been Kernunos. Another thing you might struggle with is perhaps speaking up and expressing yourself and setting boundaries. For me personally, that can be difficult sometimes. I've had trouble setting boundaries in the past. And for me personally, Lilith has helped me a lot, although Lilith is definitely not the only deity or spirit or whatever that can help with boundaries, but she definitely has helped me because she has more of that fiery nature, that kind of not aggressive, but more forceful nature, right? And you don't even have to work with deities in order to learn to set boundaries, but definitely your spiritual work can help with you learning to have more confidence, because when you're growing up and you're always taught not to speak up and that setting boundaries and saying no is a bad thing that you're going to be punished for. I know a lot of us experience this. It can be really hard as an adult, and it's not going to take a day. It's not going to take weeks. It might not even take months. It might take a year or more. It might take years. It might take months if you're lucky. But oftentimes this is such a long process, but it's so worth it in the end. And, the reward really isn't in the end, it's in the process. I think the process is the most valuable part of the whole thing. And, yeah, working through whatever trauma and when you're out and even during the situation is really going to help. And just getting through it however you can. And I hope some of these tips that we've talked about in this episode help, and whatever resources we've mentioned. And that's really, I think that's all I have to say.
Alrighty, guys. So you can find both me and Viv on Twitter, on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm the Atlantean Alchemist, and Viv is the Lunar Faery Witch. Also, continuous death with the number 3 as the E. So check us out on there, and we will see you guys in the next podcast episode. Thank you guys so much for listening in.